Welcome to this time-lapse demo of Carmi, which is the magic girl, and we're going to take a look at her now. And we're going to really kind of move through the piece, pausing at points, just to kind of take a look at what is happening during the workflow. So as I start working here on her, usually I'd always start with the head, and we'd want to start at the head usually because it's a good measuring tool. We can get the proportions down. So I started measuring out. This piece ended up being a lot more rough than usual for me. I don't know what mind space I was in, but it was extremely rough at the beginning. And design-wise, I was going to go with spectacles on the character. It's important to note this particular character was inspired by another character. She was designed as marketing art for a mobile role-playing game, and so this particular character was designed to have a slightly more Western look to her, just to appeal to Western audiences in the particular marketing of that title. And here, in terms of the hat shape, you can see I initially started with a round shape, but then I moved to an S curve over her forehead, and that was to bring in a nice bit of asymmetry into the hat to kind of eliminate any kind of parallels in that shape. I just felt that this read better. In terms of the drawing, she has quite a revealing cleavage area. That was actually slightly modified in the final painting. This character went all the way from drawing through to painting, just because we felt she was a little too edgy, and so I went in there on the final painting and added additional straps, and it actually kind of brought her edginess down just a little bit, sometimes based on whatever project you're working on. And also while you're drawing, you're trying to achieve something and you're kind of exploring the look while you're doing it. And I think sometimes you may be edgier than you intend to be, just because you're thinking about the anatomy, the structure of the anatomy so much. Otherwise, of course, some people obviously are being as edgy as they want to be. It depends on the purpose of it. But for this particular piece, my goal was really to bring in a cute character that had a little bit of sexiness to her. But I didn't want to overdo it, because the particular video game is not really a hectic kind of video game. It's more of a cute style role-playing type of game. And so here I move into doing the leg anatomy and then putting in the stockings and another S-curve there for the skirt bottom. And you'll see me do this quite often. It's nice to use S-curves in that way because there's no parallels. If you just use a C-curve one way or the other, sometimes it can look a little bit flat. And just kind of solidifying the structure of her pose. I do a slight rotation here. Using the selection tool, selecting the whole form, hitting Control-T to transform and just rotating it a little bit. And you'll see throughout the demos where I use selections to turn elements or to add in those horizontal and vertical tilts. And really that is one of the strong points of digital. It saves so much time in terms of making these tweaks, making these adjustments. And so there I lightly erase. In comic book terms, this is often called ghosting. You're kind of erasing your lines to very light and drawing over them. You can see I'm still only working on one layer there in the bottom right. And I've actually subtly moved into a refining the rough stage, even though this is falling under the umbrella of just rough. And just looking to solidify the pose and the forms, and then adding in the relevant details to her clothing, getting her outfit looking right. There's another rotation there. And we want to remember as well at this stage that if you don't exaggerate your gesture as you add details, the details tends to have this effect of killing off the drama of the pose. And so you'll want to constantly be tweaking the tilts specifically, because the tilts suffer a lot and the lines of action suffer a lot from detailing. So constantly be mindful of that. And so at this stage, I'm pretty happy with the pose overall. Her stance, I'll probably end up rotating her a little bit more. I think she feels like she needs to rotate a little bit to the right. And I just proceed with just adding in just general details, things to complete her look. Make an adjustment to that hand there so that it's easier to render when I get to the cleanup phase. And you'll see I'll also work on the right hand as well, just so that when I do get to cleanup, I will be able to draw it more quickly without having to struggle. Other thing as well is we want to keep in mind to draw everything in 3D. If you look at the little mana potions and things on her belt here, particularly this one, you can see that it has two sides. We can see a little bit of the bottom and a little bit of the side here, and we can also see a little bit of the bottom on the top lid area. And similarly with this button on her hat, it's intentional that you can see the front side of the button. You can also see a little sliver of the side of the button. And as much as is possible, you want to try and draw everything in 3D. It goes back to that using all the buffalo mantra, right? So try as much as possible to draw as many elements as possible in 3D, or show multiple sides of those objects. Okay, so moving it along. And now I'm getting to thinking about the expression a little bit, getting a bit of an idea of the face shape in here. I wouldn't call it the final face shape, just kind of placeholders, and getting the hairstyle in a little bit more as well. And then I'll start working on that hand. Thinking about the position of the hand, where would the pinky be? And the pinky usually has pinky drift, right? We don't want to forget about pinky drift. It's on its own mission. It wants to do its own thing. All right, and so at around this point, I do my own checks. I have a checklist in my mind, actually, before I talk about that. And so here I put this scarf piece, which is kind of coming from her, you know, if she had a cape, or it's actually just a scarf piece though, but it's kind of coming off the back here, and it's intentionally having multiple levels of thickness. So it starts kind of thick and then goes kind of a little bit thin and a little bit thicker, and then back to thin again. And it has a nice S-curve, and striving for that asymmetry, and also giving that sense of secondary action, right? Is there wind blowing on her that is pushing this scarf out? And also, in a sense, having these belt straps flying off the gloves, right? So that there's this kind of feeling of life in the piece. Anyway, and so I go and I check particularly things we've learned in Module 6. Those 5 key elements of character posing. I'm checking lines of action. I'm checking object overlaps. Do I have enough? I'm checking foreshortening, which I don't think this piece has any foreshortening in it. You don't always need it, but it didn't have any in it. And of course, twisting as well. Her head is, of course, rotating at a slightly different angle from her chest. And even her torso seems to be, her pelvis seems to be rotating at a little bit of a different angle. And so what I'm doing here is, I do the rough at like whatever size. It's not an important thing. But then when I need to do the final drawing, I get a much larger resolution page. So this is actually an A3 size page, probably more than likely, and I then proceed to do the clean lines on top. And so here we go. Usually in all the workflows and all the drawing demos, you'll see at some point the drawing will get really light like this, the rough will get really light, and I will go into doing the refined stage. And the key thing here is shifting your mode of thought. So you're not super worried about structure at this stage, but you're more worried about having your line overlaps read, your object overlaps read, your lines being loose and clear and clean, depending on the look that you're going for, of course, but always loose. And also going into more of a symbolic design, or a graphic design kind of mindset, being a little bit more creative, having fun with the shapes that you're putting down, but always thinking about the shapes that you're making. Are they asymmetrical? Are they dynamic? Do they read well? And so I like to think that cleanup to a lot of the time is really a rinse and repeat stage, because you're really putting down clean lines, and depending on the workflow you're using, but generally speaking, you will do all the basic lines first and then go in and do your line weights on top of that, and whatever style you're going for. As I do the eyes here, I will always spend more time than necessary, or more time, as much time as I need, should I say, making sure that the eyes read and that the eyes look good. I think in this piece, I got lucky in that it didn't take very long to get the basic eye look down that I wanted. But a lot of the times I would work even 20 or 30 minutes just on the eyes, not even worrying about the rest of the piece, because the eyes have to read well. They absolutely have to read well. They've got to be exactly right as you want them to be right. You know, if you mess them up, it will mess up the whole character. And so I spend as much time as I need on the eyes, getting them to look the way I want them to look. And there I'm using some move adjustments. And let me say at this point as well, on this particular piece, I'm using very thin lines. You can see I'm drawing in 1 pixel lines here in Photoshop. And the reason for that is because the end goal of this piece is not just to be a lined illustration. She's meant to be painted. I will want to paint over the lines and kind of make them disappear. They don't completely disappear, but to make them not really that visible. So the actual line art itself shouldn't be that visible, but I also really like clean lines to work with. So I wanted to do thin lines so that I can make them disappear a little bit later on. And I say only a little bit, but she was drawn and is using such thin lines because she's going to be painted, not colored. She's not going to have simple character coloring like manga or comic book. She's going to have actual painting over happening on the actual figure. And as I work here, particularly with the hair, looseness is absolutely pivotal, and it's so crucial, and the overlaps as well. I need to draw them quickly. I need to be loose, but the overlaps and the chunks of hair, the volumes, need to make sense. Here you can see I go back to the eye and really just trying to make everything read. I'm moving the pupils a little bit closer, and I'm doing a sort of a stylistic choice here by almost adding 2 irises. It's not quite 2 irises. It is actually only 1 iris and 1 pupil, but there's this extra circle in the eye. That's my personal stylistic preference. There's, you know, 1,000 ways you could do this. That's my way I would like to think of doing the eyes. Also notice how I zoom in and out constantly. And read distance is something we want to be very aware of. If you're constantly drawing very close up and zoomed in, and you're not zooming out to look at the overall picture, does the overall picture read? You might find that you tend to make a lot of weird mistakes, or the drawing just doesn't look right when you zoom out, and it can be an issue. So constantly vary your zoom, right? Zoom in when you need the accuracy, but constantly zoom out to the read distance, or, you know, the distance that the image is meant to be read at or looked at, and check that it reads well there, because that's ultimately what matters most, no matter how well you may have drawn an eye up close. And so on that button, I used copy and paste of an ellipse that I had drawn to really build that other side out very quickly. And again, that's the advantage of digital. Now, the thing is as well is, if you like traditional artwork, and I love traditional drawing, the workflow sort of tricks are a little bit different, but ultimately it's the same thing. I would do a rough on a clean piece of paper, right? Rough it out, and then I might use a second piece of paper to do a refined rough. But when it does come to doing final lines, you want a very finished and clean refined rough. So you might do a very finished, clean, refined rough, and really your inking stage, if you will, or your clean line stage on another piece of paper using a light box underneath, is usually really just about tracing, right? Tracing on top of that refined rough, less than it is about, as you can see in this particular workflow, less than it is about kind of designing the elements so much, because you will see that a lot of elements here are very rough, right? They're undesigned, and I will put a gem around her neck just now in that elliptical section, and that's being designed as I draw on top of this rough. And certainly you can do this traditionally as well. There's nothing stopping you from doing it traditionally. It's just going to mean that you're going to need an additional phase for the super clean cleanup, where you can combine this and to clean up and drawing on on digital. But granted, the better you get at traditional, which I just mean in terms of the practical application of drawing, your drawing skills, as you become more accurate with drawing lines and being very accurate with your pens and things like that, you'll be able to do it as well. It's just a little bit different. One of the downsides to using Photoshop when you're doing clean lines is it doesn't have line stabilization. There's nothing to really help you get these clean lines. And so the way I've grown into doing these clean lines is practicing, really, just really practicing constantly, using swoops, doing undos where I need to. And I've practiced quite a lot, to be honest, that I probably require less undos now than I used to. So for example, perhaps, 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, I was undoing, I'd do a line for an arm or a line for a piece of hair, and I'd do it, 10 or 15 times. Now I'll probably do it 3 to 5 times because I'm more accurate now and my hand-eye coordination has improved a little bit, just in terms of getting the smooth lines. The other thing is, let me just remind you as well, drawing is not about being good with your arm, obviously. It's about applying the theory and the practical in combination with each other. But it's not really much reliant. Can you draw a line? Yes. Can you draw a curve, an S curve, a C curve? Yes. Well, then you can pretty much draw, So it's really so theory heavy. But in terms of cleanup, you do need those clean lines, and it's going to take practice to move quickly and get those swooping lines down. And so I'm going to move our footage a little bit further along here. I basically continue to do the thin line stage, or my basic line stage. And once that's done, I take the rough away. I'll pause this in a moment. And over here. And then I start working on the line weights. You can see the image is pretty flat without the line weights. It's still a good image. It still kind of reads fine, but it really needs some differentiation between what is in front and what is behind. And so the line weights are quite crucial. Even if I am painting it later, the line weights are crucial in helping me see what is in front and what is behind. And also it allows me to, if I want to, iterate on the different types of styles of coloring or painting that I want to do on it, because the drawing is so solid. And we want to keep in mind as well, if you have a good drawing, but you paint it badly or you color it badly, it's still a good drawing. But if you have a bad drawing and it's colored really well or painted really well, it's still a bad drawing. So you want to make sure that the drawing really works and is really looking good, is looking appealing, is convincing the viewer of the character's emotion, of the theme of the character, the outfit, the costume, that the pose is reading well. And so here I just go in and I start line weighting using our principles of, if the object is in front, it has a thicker line. If it's behind, it has a thinner line. If it's in front, it has a darker line. If it's behind, it has a lighter line. Usually internal details have thinner, lighter lines. External silhouettes have thicker, darker lines, right? Slightly thicker, obviously, depending on the kind of work you're doing, the style you're doing. Putting in that hook shading to show the overlaps, like there on the hair pieces coming from the lip of the hat. And so I move through this piece, line weighting where I need to line weight, and you can see already the difference that it makes to this focal point of the head area. And on that note, really, when you're splitting your time up in cleanup between important areas of focus, obviously you want to work the focal points. Put your most time investment in the focal points, because if the other areas are a little bit loose or a little bit rough, it's okay, because the viewer is being directed by how you've composed the character to the face, to the hands, and to any other focal points that you've set up in the piece. And this particular cleanup that I'm doing here, because I'm using such thin brushes, I can be a little rough, especially because the resolution of this page is quite high. I can be a little rough because when you zoom out, you just don't see any line errors. It doesn't look sketchy or rough. And you can see as we zoom in closer, there are some areas with overlapping lines, and there are some areas, that are not super perfectly clean. And of course, you can go for super clean line art. That is a particular style, a particular look that is great. But you don't always have to, based on the purpose or the end goal of the piece. I'm going to move this just a little bit forward here. And so as we approach the end of the piece, really just emphasizing overlaps, emphasizing those line weights, and at the end of the day, ending up with a fairly appealing character drawing, right? And that is Carmi the Mage. She's a mage in a role-playing game called League of Defenders. You can check that out if you want to. And I'll see you guys, I guess, in the next demo. Please do enjoy the full demo of Carmi. You can go and watch this in real time. I think only her cleanup stage is slightly time-lapsed. So do enjoy that. And I'll see you guys in the next demo. Thank you for watching.